Welcome. I'm Bruce Adams. I'm the founder of the Bethesda Community Baseball Club. I'll explain soon why I'm here. But what a marvelous treat that was. I watched the documentary Sunday night, and I marveled once again at the extraordinary videos and music. I can't even imagine the work effort that went into finding all of that, let alone the fundraising that had to get the rights for us to see all this. But before we get to Aviva, tonight is co-sponsored by the DC Chamber of SABR, the Society for American Baseball Research. Aviva and I are proud SABR members, and I'm pleased to introduce Ed Baranowski, the Vice President of the Washington Bob Davids chapter of SABR, to welcome us and give us just a little introduction to SABR.
Oh, thanks, Bruce. So for those who haven't heard of it, SABR looks at all things baseball. They're really looking at not just analytics, which some people have heard of, things called sabermetrics, but also the history, the biographies, the stories, all the rich history of baseball as a game, both mostly in the U.S., but ranging from the 1800s to the present day. So it's something you can join and participate in talks and hear a lot about the fabric of baseball and what it has meant to the country.
Thanks, Ed. So now for the woman of the hour, what can I say? Aviva Kempner, a national treasure, a master storyteller with the grit first to go find the amazing video and music we've seen, and then to raise the money to be able to share her fabulous stories with us. So my story while I'm here is that I run the Bethesda Big Train Summer College baseball team. We built Shirley Povich Field. We retired Jackie Robinson's number 42. And then we retired in 2009. We retired Roberto Clemente's number 21. And I'm watching Aviva's documentary, and I said, wait a minute, Hank Greenberg's number 5 deserves to be retired. What we do with our retired numbers at Big Train is we're trying to celebrate, and celebrating Robinson and Clemente and Greenberg as baseball's barrier breakers. And as you heard a bit there, Aviva's documentary makes so clear that Hank Greenberg had to deal with so many of the same kinds of things that Jackie Robinson had to, the verbal and physical abuses that sometimes are maybe worse than, at least at the ballpark, were worse than what Robinson felt. And I want to say, this summer at Big Train Baseball, we honored Aviva as one of the Big Train Community Hero Awards for telling this important story. So Aviva, thank you for this gift. Tell us why it's so important that this documentary be re-released right now.
Before I do, I have to tell you a little about my groupie, or stalker, you might call her. She is still alive. She's 102.
Wow.
Her son lives in town. I don't see him tonight. Hopefully he'll come this week. And her maiden name was Greenberg. But I decided not to put it in the film because then people walk out. She did marry him. She didn't marry him. She took his name. So I just love her. She's just adorable. And Ralph Kiner's granddaughter is on the track team at GW, and she's going to be here Thursday night. So your question is why I decided to do it. Well, several things. It's sort of in film business that people often do the 25th anniversary. I always believe in seeing films in the theater. I'm very traditional. I mean, I still AOL. I just now got an iPhone. So I'm old-fashioned, but I don't think there's anything I can remember for years where making the film, it really literally took 13 years, and we're using a steam back, Marion and I, and the screen was like that big, and the first time I saw Hank, 8 foot tall, I'll never forget it. So when the 25th anniversary is coming up, I said, I've got to do it, and I also had these music rights that I hadn't paid for. That is the reason the film isn't streaming, and I cannot tell you how many hundreds of thousands of dollars it was. But the kids have been very generous, and I'm still raising money, so everything can be paid off, and I can do streaming. The second reason is, I was already doing it, is that how necessary I think, unfortunately, it is to have the film out. I went to U of M, University of Michigan, go Blue. although I hate football, I never went to a game except to protest the war. And you can only imagine how popular we were with that picket line. In any event, I just heard from people that I went to see because I wanted to go see Hillel about showing the film. And just recently, a kid was walking at night on campus, and some guys came up to him, a young man, and said, "Are you Jewish?" And he said, "Yes," and they beat him up. And the tensions are very high, and I heard a parallel story last week about Harvard. So I really feel that this type of film is what we need right now about how racism, anti-Semitism does not belong, and that we should be bonding about helping it or defying it. So I'm really glad to have the film out now. So that's the answer.
Thank you,
I'm
Aviva.
hoping to get it to a lot of schools and universities.
A story so many people need to hear. Now to the great George Solomon, the former sports editor of the Washington Post, the former director of the Povich Center for Sports Journalism at the University of Maryland. The press box at Shirley Povich Field is named in honor of George's work, especially the great commitment he had to diversify the ranks of sports journalism. So George is here to tell us about Shirley Povich, both his role as a Hall of Fame journalist covering sports for 75 years, and to share what it was like to be a colleague, his boss, and his friend. George.
Well, it's first I'd like to say something about Aviva. Who else but Aviva in a documentary on Hank Greenberg could come up with a final showing of the Marx Brothers?
That was great.
Don't think that did not go unnoticed. One of the great treasures of my life was working with Shirley Povich, first as a young journalist who admired him, then as a colleague, and then as his editor, but most of all as his friend. And he was so featured in the documentary, so brilliantly produced by and directed by Aviva Kempner, and how Aviva digs up all these films and all these clips is remarkable. And particularly, Greenberg flourished in the 1930s when anti-Semitism in the United States was at its highest. And that was remarkable. Povich was a great crusader against bigotry of all kinds, and including anti-Semitism. And I always, there's a great book out that I produced with his daughter Lynn Povich, Maury's sister and David's sister, about Shirley's work at the Post. And it's called All Those Years at the Washington Post. You probably can get it online from Amazon. But in the 1930s, Povich wrote about anti-Semitism in Germany and what the Germans were doing. He wrote about Hitler and Jesse Owens, and he wrote about in 1938, Shirley Povich wrote a column when baseball was segregated, how there's this group of great ball players playing in the Negro Leagues. And that's one of the first times any journalist, and particularly a white journalist, would write about the fact that blacks were not permitted to play in the major leagues, the white major leagues, until 1947 and Jackie Robinson. But it was true. Povich was a great gentleman, a great family man, a great journalist, a great writer. If I can't tell you how many people over the years have come up to me and said, I learned to read from Shirley Povich. He was a great writer, a great man, and he still continues to be missed.
And crusaded for the integration of the Washington sports teams.
He did, as he pursued integration for Major League Baseball. There's this one quick story, and I know it's getting late, but one time Joe Louis was fighting for a championship, a heavyweight championship in the I think it was 1942 or 1943. The fight was at Old Griffith Stadium, which is no longer exists. But Povich was about to go down to a seat at ringside, and he saw the sports editor of the Baltimore Afro-American, a great man named Sam Lacey, and he said, "Sam, why aren't you coming down to ringside?" And he said, "Surely they don't let me sit there." And he says, "Well, we'll see about that." And he grabs Lacey by the arm, walks him down the aisle to a ringside seat, and that's how Washington sports journalism was personally integrated.
Thank you, George. So,
Can I say one more thing about George?
you're in charge.
He has done more about hiring female sports writers. Jane Levy was, Christine Brennan was your hire? Et cetera, et cetera. From a woman who made a sports film who 25 years ago, I heard one of my interviewees say, "Boy, she knows a lot about baseball for a broad." I'll never forget that. And the film was edited by a woman. Marion and I really appreciate that, so thanks.
We have a plaque on the George Solomon press box at Povich Field that recognizes the extraordinary work that George did in diversifying sports
appreciated.
journalism.
Meanwhile, I want a bathroom named after me in the field.
Yes, the pissed off ladies' room will one day, I'm sure, be named after Aviva.
I'm gonna.
So Matt Fruman is not here in his role as a council member, so please hold your questions about trash not being picked up until after the panel discussion. Matt's here to tell us what it was like to be a Detroit Tigers and Hank Greenberg, what they meant to him as a kid growing up in Detroit, a generation removed from the folks who we just watched in that documentary. Matt.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's really hard to believe it's 25 years ago that the movie came out. I mean, growing up in Detroit, sports for me was a lot. And my uncle had been a great athlete. I remember he had gotten invited to try out for the NFL, and he didn't go. And my Zadie forever, 40 years later, said what a mama's boy he was that he didn't go off and take that tryout. Hank Greenberg was always part of the mythology of sports and sports for Jews in the Detroit area. I came in a different era. When I was 8 or 9 years old, that's 1968, when the Tigers won the World Series. And the excitement around that, and my sister and I, we shared a room at that time, and we would listen to the ball games on the radio and all the magic of that. And when the Tigers won, we watched the games in the World Series in class in elementary school. I was in 4th grade, and we didn't have instruction. They brought a TV in, and we watched the ball games against the Cardinals. But that's a piece of the story of this movie for me. But the way, way bigger piece is 25 years ago, more than 25 years ago, my mother had a stroke, and she was really devastated by the stroke. And she had been a person who cared for everyone. She was the person who did for people. She wasn't the person who had things done for her. So it was very, very painful for my mother to be in that situation. And I would go back and forth and visit with my family and try to show love and affection for her. And one day, I saw that there's this movie playing at the Maple Theater, The Life and Times of Hank Greenberg. It had just come out. And that's my mother's era. When she was 8 or 9 years old, those are those seasons in the 30s. And so I said, "Hey, Mom, can we go? And let's go check out this movie," because she didn't leave the house as much as she had in another time when in a wheelchair. And we went over to the Maple Theater, and we went in, and the lights went down, and the movie came up, and it transported my mother. She was not a 70-year-old woman contending with this terrible pain. She was an 8-year-old girl watching her hero on the screen, and when the lights came up and she was beaming, I thought, I don't know this Aviva Kempner, but I love Aviva Kempner.
That is beautiful. Thank you. All right, we're going to go back to Ed now to try to place Greenberg in his rightful place in baseball history. And I'm watching that and I'm thinking, what should the record books look like for some of these people who gave up 4 seasons of their careers at the peak of their careers? I mean, an asterisk is not good enough. How can Saber figure out how to recognize what the Greenbergs and the Williams and the Fellers missed?
Yeah.
Maggio.
Well, obviously, a huge loss. But in baseball, particularly back then, there were 3 major stats that people would look at. You had batting average, home runs, and RBIs. And the latter 2, home runs and RBIs, are what they call counting stats because you just accumulate those with your career. And then you have the rate stats, like the batting average, which is something that you can scale. Well, Saber has kind of looked at how these rate stats work over careers. And in particular, batting average is something that would have more staying power, and you could look at that and figure out how many hits you might get from that. But there's also something that they do. It gets a little bit more complicated in that, in addition to batting average, you have something called on-base percentage, which counts walks as well. And he walked a tremendous amount, which really added to his value. And it's only something that they're really starting to appreciate now, that this was a tremendous benefit to, feedback again, sorry. It really increased his value, and it's something that, if you look at it, as far as the top hitters for this rate stat of how well you walk and your slugging percentage, something called OPS, or on base plus slugging, he's the 20th all time. He ranks with Stan Musial. If you look at home runs, when he retired, he was 5th in home runs for a career. He had 330. The other 4 were, well, 3 of them were above 500. Babe Ruth at 700 and some, 714. Jimmy Fox and Mel Ott had above 500. Lou Gehrig was just a hair below 500, but of course, injury cost him. But he easily would have hit 500 because you'd be looking at about 40 more home runs a year for those 4 years. Add that to his 330, he's right there at that 500 level. So I think he's definitely in that ballpark as far as comparable in terms of the all-time greats. He's an inner circle Hall of Famer with those. You're looking at how well his rate stats compare to other people as far as averaging over his top seasons.
And has that been adequately described and played out in the literature?
I think it's people are starting to accept that more. You're starting to hear some of these stats show up even in regular baseball broadcasts that are not as foreign. And originally people objected to anything that wasn't average home runs and RBIs. But now people are starting to see that these things really do affect the value of players. And in particular, there's something called WAR, wins above replacement. Obviously, WAR means a lot more than the war that he had to go through.
Yes.
It's changed a lot. But they look at how well you've done in your peak 7 seasons, and he, again, is right up there with inner circle Hall of Famers. He really is at that level for his top 7 seasons.
So we have been here a while, but are there Aviva, can we take 1 or 2 questions?
No, we encourage them.
Okay, yes, sir, you're up.
I'm wondering, in your opinion, how he compared with Joe DiMaggio. If he had signed with the Yankees, he would have been playing contemporary, I guess, with DiMaggio. So how do you compare those 2 players?
Good question. I think that, again, they're comparable. DiMaggio had a little bit more value, I guess, because of fielding, in theory. But if they had equivalent Hall of Fame cases. Actually, DiMaggio was the only player who there was a backlog in Hall of Fame voting. And if you look you'll see that Hank Greenberg had to wait about 8 or 9 years before he got in, only because there were so many people. The Hall of Fame had just started, and there were 40 people on the ballot when Hank Greenberg was there that eventually made it to the Hall of Fame. Joe DiMaggio was the only one who had a career before Hank Greenberg in that big cluster of people who made it into the Hall before Hank Greenberg, and only by a couple years. So I think that he was thought of at that same level, and I think it would add the New York boost to that. He would be thought of. You'd hear a lot more of him.
It would be interesting to speculate if he had signed with the Yankees. Would the Yankees have signed Joe DiMaggio altogether, or would they have let Joe DiMaggio go somewhere else because they had a star home run hitter already in Hank Greenberg? I mean, you could write fiction stories.
But he didn't sign with the Yankees because Lou Gehrig was the first baseman, and he realized that he wasn't going to beat out Lou Gehrig.
And he was a better first baseman than an outfielder. He was a little slow, but as a first
Aviva.
baseman, he was great.
Well, let me tell you a little secret. I mean, I think it's even in the film. He liked playing and hitting in Tiger and Briggs Stadium because it was easier to hit home runs. So in the end, I think Hank was glad that that's where he played. The second thing is, I think he really wanted to get out of New York. There was something in him that, to see more of the world. So I think in that respect, he was happy too. What's nice is DiMaggio and he had a really nice relationship after their careers, and Steve Greenberg just sent me a funny little video of DiMaggio getting an award and evoking Hank in a very positive way. We have to put it on the website, so go to hankgreenberg.film.org and it'll be up there soon. So at least there was a real a nice relationship.
Do we have another question or comment? Yes, up to the right. Got a mic coming.
Thank you for the fabulous evening. So one quick comment, then a question. The comment, just to, Aviva mentioned beforehand that the Tigers are on the verge of making the postseason, and the irony maybe that you may or may not be aware of is that if the season ended today, they would be in the second wild card slot and be playing the Orioles in Baltimore next week, which in theory we could all go and see, except that the games are on Rosh Hashanah, and so the dilemma is whether we should follow Hank and not go to see the Tigers play on Rosh Hashanah. And I just was curious, Aviva, what your next projects are.
In terms of Yom Kippur, you know that God intervened, so he broke his wrist in 35. Hank did intend to play. He was not going to skip the not playing in the World Series. And listen, I have all the respect for Sandy Koufax. I would have even made a film about him if he had agreed to it. But there's a big difference between alternating as a pitcher and being, your key hitter. Two things. One is I'm finishing a film on Ben Hecht, the famous Hollywood writer. And before that, he was a newspaper reporter, and he's famous also for trying to do everything he could to save European Jewry. I showed 17 minutes of the film this last Jewish Film Festival. And then I want to make a short film called Pissed Off about how women in Congress fought for potty parity to get a bathroom off the Senate and House side. An issue I identify with in having a small bladder and wanting equality for women. And we're going back and digitizing all of the interviews in Partisans of Vilna, and some of them we never even used in the film, and trying to get them out. Also, I'm hoping to maintain democracy in this country, and I'm working very hard on that.
Aviva's got a busy life.
Yes.
I saw another hand up there, I thought. Yes, sir.
Was he involved with the Cleveland Indians when Larry
Yeah.
Doby took first?
He and Beck they were the first, Doby was the first African-American hire in the
American League, right.
and they were responsible for it. And I assure you, they were also owned the Chicago White Sox at one point. The White Sox would not be in this position. If Beck, I always, by the way, wanted to make a film on Beck. Beck is wreck, but it never worked out.
It's very rare that a player becomes an expert in the managerial role, either general manager or field.
Well, it's more now. I mean, isn't Derek Jeter?
It didn't last.
Yeah.
He's out of work.
Didn't last. Is there another comment or question?
Wait a minute. I should also mention that Greenberg hired Satchel Paige as a rookie in 1948, I believe, and Page, at the age of 50-something, was Rookie of the Year for Cleveland.
And then still, when he was in Arizona for a meeting, he couldn't check in because Jews couldn't check in those hotels. I mean, Hank himself. So even in his post-career, he experienced that. And you know, Steve was deputy commissioner of baseball at one point. And that's why you see a contribution from Fay Vincent. And I'll never forget when Bud Selig gave me one of the honors for the films. I got up and I said, I dedicate this to, I always say, statehood for DC and the return of Major League Baseball to Washington.
Another cause Aviva's worked hard on. If there are no more questions or comments there, I wonder if my colleagues have a question or a comment for Aviva before we wrap this up.
Well, I want to know how you got all that film.
What, I mean, the footage?
The video.
My MO is to use feature footage as well as documentary, you know, like headlines, newsreels. So I believe the filmmakers in the past, from Pride of the Yankees, I mean, that's Gehring's story, to to use feature films to show stories. I mean, when he says that, you know, we didn't know from baseball. That scene in Brooklyn Bridge with the Zeta, the grandfather, is one of the funniest bits about pretending you know about baseball. So why not use that? I mean, there's nothing like it.
Did you have to get permission?
Yeah, and pay a lot of money.
Oh, you know.
Yeah.
Imagine the work.
You know, and some people are very generous. Some people are not very generous. You sort of have to write to, I mean, I once met Les Moonves, and because of that, I got some free footage for another film. I mean, you got to sort of work it. That's what's happening with the music rights right now. I would just like to say one thing about me being in Detroit last week. So on that Wednesday night, there was someone from Sabre talking about what Hank's stats would be, someone talking about how Shard-Zedek was like 90 years ago when Hank came there. And then he is very involved with others in town, talking to the Shrine of the Little Flower. I don't know about you, Matt, or other people from Detroit, but whenever we went by the Shrine of the Little Flower, my dad would yell, that anti-Semite, which in Yiddish means that anti-Semite. So Levy says to me, do you want to tour it? Now, you don't know what it means after you've been hearing your whole childhood that this is the most evil man next to Henry Ford. So yes, we went in, and I went and toured the Shrine of the Little Flower, and they couldn't have been sweeter, and they've got beautiful things there. Although they do have one panel in gold about the money chasers, and we all know what that means. But what Levy told me is they had lobbied very hard with the Archdiocese, because there's a panel about Father Coughlin, who, by the way, had masterminded all these incredible art pieces from Italy. And it used to say, allegedly, an anti-Semite. They got them to remove the allegedly. They haven't made a formal statement of it, but that's a big, big step for that church. So little step by step, you know, different. And some of the members of the Ford family themselves, and certainly what the Ford Foundation does, I think his name has been, I wouldn't say quite cleared, but I think, you know, in some respects, it changed a lot in terms of that. But I still have a big gripe. So you hear the story that when he's in the minor leagues, and JoJo White comes up to him in Beaumont, Texas, and Hank says, what are you looking at? He said, well, I've always been told that Jews have horns. Now, you know what that's from? Michelangelo, who was this incredible artist, made a sculpture of Moses, and Moses has horns. And why? Because it was a misinterpretation of rays from the original Bible. I'll never forget going to Rome and seeing that statue, and I kept on saying to people around me, no, 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 it's not horns, it's rays. So somehow, somewhere, I'm going to get the Italian government to do that. And anyone who wants to join me in that, please do. And then, of course, the great Kurt Flood story. I hope you caught that. That Hank, because he was unfairly treated, was supportive in the Kurt Flood story. And of course, the fact that they finally all unionized as players. And it's as my dad would say, a scandal that Marvin Miller never made it to the Hall of Fame when he was alive. Because he deserved, certainly, no one did more for equality in pay.
But
Could I just make a comment? I've heard people in baseball say the three most important names in baseball are Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson, and Marvin Miller. And my wife and I were privileged to know him and his son very well.
Good.
He's an amazing guy.
Meet with me after, because I'd love his son to see the film. And if you know any of the relatives of people in the film, I mean, I'm still going back, Arn Tellem, the one with, Arn Tellem is very funny, because he grew up like I did, Meshuggah about Hank because of his father. He joined Manette Phillips' law firm in LA solely because Steve Greenberg worked there. Then they became very good friends. He is now the VP of the Pistons. So, and very good friends with Steve, and we're gonna do a special screening there in Detroit in the future. So I said, Arn, I want to see that, that card that was in your tuxedo. He says, oh, it's somewhere in storage. So I just think it's just one of the best stories.
The building's about to close, but if Matt or Ed have a final comment?
Yeah, I was curious about the Kurt Flood story, and that being a former owner, for him to show up supporting a player.
Big deal.
Yeah, it is.
He knew the feeling. When he got that telegram, it just, it was ridiculous. Although it gave me a great ending of the film, I wouldn't have had the Jackie Robinson ending. And Max Dixon, who I so adored, both as a friend and as a rabbi, to have him say, that he stood for what we believed in.
Thank you. Matt,
I guess
you get the last word.
I get the last word. I mean, the reference to the Shrine of the Little Flower, I grew up a few miles down the road from there, and every time passing that, of course, the same kind of thing. It also puts me in the mind of my father when I was in high school. He took me by the Rouge plant, and we pulled over to the side of the road, and he said, you see that overpass? That's where the UAW fought the Pinkertons and built the American middle class. Sort of still makes the hair on the back of my neck go up. But mainly, I want to thank Aviva for this movie and what it meant just for that one day with my mother and the whole body of work. It's amazing the things that you've done, the stories you brought to life, so thank you for that.
And please send all your friends, all your enemies, either tomorrow night, Thursday night, or Sunday morning, because we still have 3 more screenings.
And Aviva still has to pay for some of this, so you can honor her great work by helping her with that. So how about one final round of appreciation here for our panel and for Aviva helping us to recognize these incredible lives in such a moving and meaningful way. Thank you, Aviva.
Thanks for coming.